Streaming live on WFLA Now. Powered by 1-800-ASK-GARY.
All right. Hello, everybody. This is Chief Meteorologist and Climate Specialist Jeff Berardelli. I want to welcome you. This afternoon, we're discussing two very big climate stories. Now, on Monday, the IPCC, which is the international climate body of the UN with 195 member nations, released the most comprehensive climate impact report of all time. And this has very big implications for Florida ecosystems and the people like me and like you who live here in the state. And then also on Monday, just a few hours later, ironically, the Supreme Court heard the most important climate case in 10 years, which may end up limiting the EPA's ability to curb climate change. And I have two of the world's best experts with me today. First, I want to introduce you to Michael Gerard. He's a professor of climate and environmental law at Columbia University, the founder and faculty director of the groundbreaking Sabin Center for Climate Change Law, and one of the foremost environmental lawyers in the nation. But his real claim to fame is that he was my climate law professor. Is that right?
And you did very well, Jeff.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I think you inflated my grade a little bit. I'm not sure, but I loved your class. Actually, Michael's a pretty serious guy. He would never inflate anyone's grade. That's the truth. And Dr. Ellen Prager, you can see her twice in this video here. She's on the bottom right and also in the middle. She's a marine scientist and author, and she is a whiz at communicating science and making it interesting and relatable to an audience. And she lives right here in the Tampa Bay area, and she knows all about how climate is going to impact our ecosystems and also our economy, because the two are connected. Hey, Ellen.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing great. So, two huge climate stories on the same day. Michael, you were pointing out the irony that, the UN and 195 member nations, about 1,000 volunteer scientists, come out with news that, essentially our fate, the fate of humanity is on the brink here if we do not do something about climate change. Then, literally a few hours later, the Supreme Court hears what is likely one of the most important climate cases ever, which could curtail the ability of the federal government to actually rein in climate change. If that's not irony, I don't know what is, right?
Irony or tragedy or some combination.
Yeah, some combination sounds right. So, Ellen, I want to start with you on this IPCC report. First of all, kind of the wide view, and JB, actually, we have a graphic. This is what was one of the headlines. The scientific evidence is unequivocal. Climate change is a threat to human well-being and the health of the planet. Any further delay in concerted global action will miss a brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future. Dr. Prager, Ellen, I don't think people understand why climate change, with temperatures rising a couple of degrees, would possibly threaten civilization, threaten the health of the planet, the species on it, and the humans that inhabit it, right? You think to yourself, well, temperatures go up a couple of degrees, big deal. I'll wear a light sweater rather than a coat, but everything is so connected, isn't it?
It is, and I think one of the key words in that statement is livable. The planet's going to still be here, but it's not going to be the planet we want to live on right now, or what we think it's like. So, I mean, people just have to watch the news and open their eyes. Right now, there's huge flooding in Australia. We've had serious wildfires. We're seeing sea level rise, and we're getting, here in Florida in particular, we're seeing more days of what we call sunny day flooding, where there's no rain and we're seeing the sea wash into the streets. The evidence is right before our eyes, and this report puts very plainly, the evidence is there, and we have a very small window of time to really change things and make a difference.
The stat that I've thrown out there, and that people always they stop dead in their tracks, is that only 2% of coral cover is left in the Florida Keys Reef Tract. Only 2%. And people are like, whoa, what? How is that possible? I don't think people understand how fast this is proceeding, especially as it pertains to coral.
So one thing that a lot of people don't know about the corals in Florida is that the coral reefs there are sort of living on almost the thin edge of their tolerance. It's actually not the best place for corals. So there's never been 100% coral cover. So we've already started at a low percent. And then with not only stress and bleaching from temperature rise, but when the water gets warm, the corals become much more susceptible to disease. And so the combination of disease, water temperatures, and probably something to do with ocean acidification, we've lost a huge amount of coral. And here in Florida, we can't, that if we lose a huge amount, we never started with a lot. So it has severe consequences, not just for the reefs and the ocean and the marine life that depend on corals, but for the economy of Florida as well and jobs.
So NOAA put out a report saying that coral is worth $8.5 billion to Florida. Because remember, it's not, it's so many things. It's tourism, it's diving, it's fishing, it's the fish that depend upon coral reefs. 25% of marine life at some point in their life interact with corals, so they depend on them for their health. Then fast forward, sea level rise. NOAA just came out with a report saying that St. Petersburg, Florida could see another almost 2 feet of sea level rise by 2060. I was even surprised by that. So I went to look at, and they're calling for, and that's a bit of a top end estimate, but even a middle of the road estimate of 12 to 15 inches would be catastrophic. So Michael, I'll bring you in on this because, we're going to have to start moving people, right? I mean, people are going to be displaced, coastlines, not just here in Florida, but all over the world. So there are some big policy implications there. And it's not, and by the way, mortgages and insurance too. This is a complicated scenario that's going to accelerate. Is that not right?
It's going to get a lot worse, and obviously Florida, especially South Florida, is right in the bullseye here. There are projections that parts of the state and more parts of the state are going to become uninhabitable because they're underwater, or at least they're under such threat of water. We're going to have to move someplace. Where are they going to go? Are they going to get any compensation? Are there going to be new communities that are built inland? Do they have to move out of state? Is anybody liable for this? It's just a whole host of issues that have not at all been resolved.
And Ellen, Michael brought up a good point with the intrusion of sea level into the water table. That could compromise the fresh water supply in Florida, but also the intrusion into septic tanks and the water becoming really polluted. I know that there are people in Miami that say that before the water gets to their door, there's going to be a bigger issue, which is going to be waste in the water. Is that right?
It is. Well, and it's let me just say, it's also agriculture. Think about salt water intruding into agricultural lands. So, but sewage is already a problem in these rainy day flooding when you have a concurrence of high onshore winds, high tides, and if you have rain too. But if the tides and the winds, when that water starts coming on shore, particularly in Miami, they actually see it coming up through the manholes. It actually comes up through the sewage and the septic systems in people's lawns. It starts bubbling up. So already it's a problem. So you have, also don't forget about all the chemicals on the road. So all of those things, it's kind of a nasty mix that you get in those roads and those flooding waters. So you do not want to be there in that flooding water. And certainly it's going to put a lot of our utilities at risk and agriculture at risk, public health at risk. So these are real problems, and they're already starting to face it in Miami.
I did a story a couple of months ago on all of Florida's ecological problems, and so many of them are related to things that are ancillary to climate change. Nutrient pollution, obviously, is a big problem here. As a result, 15+% of the manatees in Florida died this year. And, the reason why people like me and so many of us have moved here is because Florida is a beautiful and unique place in the United States and in the world. And so many people have moved here that it's compromising the ecosystem, the life, and the people that depend on that too. So, at what point, and I'll bring Michael in on this, how do we handle this when Congress is unwilling to do anything at all on climate change, and the federal government just keeps running up against obstacle after obstacle? Are there any good options here?
Well, Congress has not passed a major new environmental law since 1990. It's been stuck in partisan paralysis for 32 years. Many of the states are stepping up. There's a lot that states can do. The single most important thing that we can do to stave off climate change itself, as opposed to adapting to the impact, is to shift away from fossil fuels, to build out a massive amount of wind and solar and the necessary transmission. And there's a lot that's happening on that front. The economics are getting much better. There are a lot of private businesses that are going into it. We're seeing a tremendous growth in these renewable energy sources, but we need to increase that growth by up to an order of magnitude in order to really move away from fossil fuels and have the zero emissions economy that we really need in order to meet the UN goals.
I think it's a good time to talk about what's happening in Europe right now. Europe is obviously dependent upon some fossil fuels from Russia. That's causing some geopolitical issues. People don't want their oil prices going up. They don't want their gas prices going up. But at the same standpoint, if using that political lever against Vladimir Putin seems like an absolutely necessary thing to slow his progress and the amount of money that's coming into Russia. Of course, there are two competing theories here. We've heard some folks on one side of the political spectrum saying that we should be drilling more to achieve energy independence. And at the same standpoint, you hear the others saying, no, just get off of fossil fuels as fast as possible so we don't have to worry about these ups and downs in the market, and we can't be held hostage by political players like Vladimir Putin. So I guess, Michael, I'll ask you first, and Ellen, you can talk about it next, but I am curious to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, a decision today to drill or to build a pipeline or something like that won't yield any actual energy produced for several years. It has no impact on the current situation. And whenever we do have that, the oil and the gas prices will fluctuate up and down. Wind and solar don't. You don't have to pay for it. We're not shipping money overseas. We have the ability to ramp up our wind and solar production in a matter of a few years on the same scale that we could build new natural gas pipelines and so forth, and that'll stick with us for the long term without these fluctuations, without giving more power to Russia and Saudi Arabia and other countries that are big producers of natural gas and oil, and that can and do yield a lot of geopolitical power that way.
And that is real energy independence, because not only are we producing our own energy at home, but we're not, involved in the oil and gas markets and at the beck and call and whim of these markets, which go up and down all the time. Ellen, what are your thoughts on what's going on overseas and how we deal with that in terms of clean energy and its impact on the environment?
Well, I completely agree with Michael, but it's also another aspect of it. As the report says, we have a short window, a short time frame to really make changes before the impacts of climate change become irreversible and truly catastrophic. And if we start drilling and putting in more pipelines, we're only delaying making those changes, those very, very important changes. And so we need to act more. And we here in Florida, we hear about being resilient and adapting and mitigation. Well, those things are all great, but they're still not the same as reducing emissions and moving towards alternative energy. So, to me, there really is no question which we should be doing. And I just want to say, we all remember that oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. Why do we want to put the potential for more of that out there when we know how to get energy in other ways?
I've always thought of adaptation as, you have a big headache, you take a Tylenol, it's all better for a day and then you have to take another Tylenol again, but you never got to the root of the issue, which could be something, like a brain tumor, and so you just ignore that and it just grows and it metastasizes and it gets out of control. And then next thing you know, you have no options left. So right now we're just putting masking tape on a lot of these problems, obviously. All right. So I know we're going to end up with some questions here, but I want to move on to this big Supreme Court EPA case. So from your class, Michael, I learned that the Clean Air Act back in the early 1970s gave the EPA authority to regulate pollutants. But of course, back then, although we kind of understood climate change, we started to understand it, we didn't realize how big of a problem it was. And so Congress didn't give express consent to regulate greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane. Is that correct? Is that a correct assessment?
That's right. Congress didn't explicitly say it, but it did say that as new pollutants emerge, EPA can decide that they pose a danger and can regulate them. So in 2007, the U.S. Supreme Court said, yes, the Clean Air Act does apply to greenhouse gases because it really can pose an endangerment.
Right. And so that happened in Massachusetts versus the EPA, correct? Right. And so the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 ruling, said that the EPA not only had the authority, but they had the responsibility, is that correct, to regulate greenhouse gases?
Yeah, once EPA makes this endangerment finding, once they find that greenhouse gases pose danger to health and welfare, they have to regulate it. And EPA did find that danger. They were challenged in court, they were upheld, and so that's locked in.
Right. So essentially, carbon dioxide is now considered a pollutant.
Yeah.
Is that in danger now with this new Supreme Court? Obviously, we have a new Supreme Court, a new makeup, more conservative Supreme Court. Is there the chance that the Supreme Court could say, no, carbon dioxide shouldn't be a pollutant?
No, I don't think that's going to happen. And none of the parties in the case were really making that claim. The issue is how much can EPA do about it? This particular case that was just argued was about coal-fired power plants. And there are questions about what is the extent of EPA's authority to regulate existing coal-fired power plants. And the issue may be decided more broadly than that, but I really don't think they're going to go so far as to say EPA may not regulate greenhouse gases.
So this is just for coal power plants, or does it apply to natural gas plants as well?
Well, it also applies to natural gas plants, but the difference is that natural gas plants can comply with the sorts of standards that EPA was talking about. Coal-fired power plants would probably have to shut down or greatly curtail their operations if this old rule went into effect.
So most of the parties bringing this, I think it was 4 different cases, right? 4 different cases.
Yeah, it was the state of West Virginia and the state of North Dakota and 2 coal companies. We had a bunch of electric power companies that came in on the other side. The power companies said they liked the rule, it gave them predictability, and they supported the EPA rule.
That is interesting. So essentially fossil fuel interests and fossil fuel states coming in on the side of trying to rein in the ability of the EPA to regulate emissions from power plants. But on the other hand, electric utilities saying, no, we'd rather have these regulations because it tells us exactly how we can plan in the future.
And it's really all about coal. That's really what was at issue here.
That's interesting.
In reality.
I didn't realize that. I thought it was a little more broad than that. So Alan, let me bring you back in on this conversation. How important is it that EPA have the ability to do their jobs?
Well, I think we've seen in the past couple of years what happens when they can kind of just say, oh, no, we're not going to regulate. We're not going to, enforce laws. So it's really important. I mean, there's so many places where we need the ability to regulate just because on their own, what we've seen is there are some industries that they're not going to do it for the public good. So we need that power of enforcement.
What comes to mind when you say that to me is the opioid crisis. Now, I'm obviously stepping way out of my expertise here. I'm not going to say anything more than a lot of people died across the country. And there was a lack of regulation that played into that. So Michael, let me ask you this, because this is something that I've seen written on this EPA case. Is it possible that, depending upon the way the Supreme Court decides this case, that other agencies may be restricted in their ability to regulate, in their zone?
Yeah, there's a doctrine called the major questions doctrine that basically says that an agency can't do something that affects a big part of the economy unless they have very specific authorization from Congress to do that. Now, the Supreme Court did use that doctrine a few weeks ago to throw out OSHA's vaccine rule, and saying that OSHA didn't have a clear enough authority to regulate COVID to impose those rules. So the same theory might be applied in this case. The same theory might be applied to other agencies that try to deal with our really true and present major climate change or public health risks. But unless the Congress has specifically said that an agency can do that, they might not be able to do that depending on how the court rules.
You know what? So, JB, if you can, I want to put up another graphic on our weather system here. And it's what the IPCC says that we need to do, at least one suggestion, by restoring degraded ecosystems and effectively and equitably. Equitably is something you see a lot in this report. Conserving 30% to 50% of the Earth's land, freshwater, ocean habitats, society can benefit from nature's capacity to absorb and store carbon, and we can accelerate progress towards sustainable development. And that's just one thing. It seems a bit pie in the sky because the amount of land and oceans that right now are conserved are much less than that. Do you see this as, first of all, feasible, Ellen, and do you see this as even making a dent in the problem?
I'm sorry to say, I think it's a little bit of wishful thinking. Actually getting it done is pretty tough. We have, there have been an increase in what we call marine protected areas around the world, but a lot of those are sort of paper protected areas. They don't have the enforcement that goes with it. They don't have the necessary regulations or human resources to make those real protected areas. So I think that's a great idea. And the truth is, it's not one thing like protecting the land and the oceans. It's a whole slew of things that we have to do together with going towards alternative energies that will make a difference. So I hope people won't focus just on one recommendation, because we have to do a whole bunch of things, from food waste, how we do agriculture, to education, even to protected areas. Those things all have to be done together, at least in my opinion.
I don't think people understand how climate change can be so threatening. And sometimes I have a hard time kind of explaining to people just how interconnected everything is, how our ecosystems depend upon a stable climate, how we and our systems, and you can see every time there's a disruption far away, it disrupts our lives here because everything is so interconnected, human systems and biological systems and physical systems, that it could cause a domino effect that could overwhelm us decently quickly. I think perhaps people are starting to get a sense for how fragile our human systems are. Would you agree with that? Either one of you?
Yeah, I mean, and we're now experiencing the 6th great extinction in geological history. The last one was the 70 million years ago, the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs. We're approaching that kind of level, and we depend on these species. The wildfires that we are seeing, the flooding, the unprecedented inland storms that lead to fatal flooding all over the world, it's all adding up, and the IPCC makes it clear that this is going to get a lot worse.
And, the United States has really not done much of any kind of work on this in terms of federal legislation. Let me bring up the next graphic here. These were the headlines in both the New York Times and NBC News, basically talking about how important this case is. And I'll bring it back to what we talked about at the beginning. I am flabbergasted, and was when I took your class at Columbia University, that Congress has not passed any meaningful climate legislation, and yet we're staring down the barrel of a cannon right now. And the only way that we have to make progress right now is the hope that corporations will move in the right direction, and that certain states, and it's only a handful of states, will work at the local level. But at the federal level, you know, it's all executive branch action and agency action, and it's possible that the EPA will have a lot less authority sometime soon. By the way, when would this, Michael, when would this decision come down?
Probably May or June.
So is that an accurate assessment in terms of our ability to fight climate change here in the U.S.? What could we be doing better? What are other countries doing well?
Well, there's a lot that the U.S. is doing to transform the energy system. The bipartisan infrastructure bill has a good deal of money for that. If any part of the Build Back Better law makes it through, that'll be even more. The private sector is doing a lot there. So the transformation of the energy system is moving forward, though it should go a lot faster. With motor vehicles, we're seeing tremendous progress moving toward electric vehicles. Most of the major automakers have said that their future is with electric vehicles. That's another very big part of it. So we are making progress in a number of areas, just not nearly at the pace that the IPCC tells us is necessary.
It's almost like we're walking up a big mountain with a backpack on our back, and every few weeks somebody throws a big rock or a big boulder at us, because you know, it's hard for people to concentrate on climate change when they're trying to put food on the table. When there's a war, when there's a war overseas, people are genuinely worried that at some point we could be involved in this. So people have more immediate, concerns. So we're just being hit from all angles, I think. And I think it's a little overwhelming for people to think about, hey, what'll happen 10, 20, 30 years from now? I can tell you one thing that comes to my mind is that I have a baby girl. Her name is Gracie Lee, and she is almost 4 months old now. And if I'm fighting for anybody, I'm fighting for her future. And I think that we need to remember that we're not doing this for ourselves necessarily, us three, our generations, but really we're doing it for our children. Oh, and by the way, for me, it's a question of morality and ethics. It really, really is. I would say the reason that I got into this, beyond being a meteorologist and jump back in to do climate change, was because I saw this as a grave moral issue. Here we are, and we're not taking care of this earth, which we were born on, and that has given us such riches, and we're destroying it.
A baby born today should still be around in 2100. And when we think about what the environmental conditions will be in 2100, will that now little boy or little girl grow into a habitable world? We should all care deeply about that.
And they may be alive, but will they be thriving? The American dream has always been that we leave a better life for our children. I don't know that I can say that my daughter is going to have a better life than me. And to me, that's very sad.
It is very sad. And to think about some of the things that we have been able to experience on our planet, from rainforests to coral reefs to manatees, look what's happening. These mangroves and wetlands, all the things that we've experienced that we rely on, are they still going to be around? And are they going to be able to do what they do for us now? I think those are really big questions. Look at the ice sheets. They are melting, the ice sheets and the glaciers are melting much faster than scientists had predicted. And to me, that's one that's very scary, because we don't see it in front of our eyes. But if those melt faster and sea level really starts to rise faster to a higher level, that's huge consequences.
Yeah, John Englander, who is a sea level rise scientist, you probably know him, Ellen, and you might know him too, Michael. He gave me an analogy. He said, if you take a drop of water and you put it in a stadium once per minute, so you just take a drop of water once per minute, how long would it take to fill that stadium up? So you're dropping, but you're doubling it every minute. So you 1 drop, and then the second time 2 drops, and the third time 4 drops. How long would it take? I'm just going to ask you guys, what do you think? How long would it take to fill that stadium with water?
No idea.
Okay, good answer. I'll just
6 months. 6 months.
6 months. That's interesting, but I'm gonna have to give you a D- on that. But I'll tell you why in a second, according to at least John Englander. So that's what's happening with sea level rise, where we're getting close to the point of doubling every so many years, the pace, the rate at which sea level rise is going up. The answer is 47 minutes. 47 minutes, because if you think about it, once you've doubled enough times, the last time, all you have to do is you go from half the stadium is full to the full stadium is full, right? So at the end, it happens really quickly. Again, that's according to something I read in his book and something that he said. I've interviewed him too. But anyway, the point is that once sea level rise starts accelerating, it starts to really happen very quickly.
Jeff, one of the things, let me just say that part of the problem with the sea level rise and why everybody says, well, how come we don't know? How come we don't know that exact rate? Nobody was on the planet the last time the ice sheets melt. We actually don't even understand the full processes of how this is happening or going to happen. So it's not a simple thing like saying, there's this much ice, here's the rate it's going. It could happen. I mean, we may hit a trigger point where it goes really fast. So there's a lot of unknowns here, but we know what's happening, and we know what's happening faster than was originally predicted.
Several thousand years ago, really just after the last ice age, so probably 15,000 years, somewhere around that, the fastest that sea level rose was 15 feet per century. So there was a short window of time where that's how fast sea level rose. So I don't think 15 feet per century. So now there's a lot less ice on the world right now, so it may not happen. But of course, a breakaway, ice sheet in, let's say, Thwaites Glacier down in Antarctica could change things very quickly for us. So anyway, I think we're kind of getting to the end of this. You guys have things that you have to do. So is there any last words to kind of wrap this up from either one of you that maybe you wanted to talk about that I didn't bring up?
Let me just say that most of the things that we need to do to cut back on climate change also have a lot of other benefits. They not only cut back on climate change, they make people healthier because they get rid of conventional air pollutants, and they create a lot of jobs. There are a lot more jobs in wind and solar and energy efficiency and so forth than there are in digging coal. So we benefit the economy, we benefit human health, we benefit the overall environment, and most importantly, we benefit the little children who are being born today.
That's great. It's great advice. And, the Bureau of Labor Statistics does say that solar and wind are, I think, the number 2 and 3 fastest growing jobs. Solar technician, wind technician, 2 and 3 fastest growing jobs. Do we have I see, hey Jeff, that's my tag. Okay. All right. Sorry. That confused me for a second. And Ellen, do you have anything else that you want to say?
Sure. I mean, I just think one of the things I want to say is that there's hope and that we can all make a difference. I think 2 things happen. Some people feel hopeless and they feel like they can't make a difference, but we know the things that can be done, that there's a whole host of things we can do to turn this around, and hope is not gone. It's not all doom and gloom, but as the report comes out, as we've all said, it needs to be started now. We cannot wait any longer. We can't drill more and just put it off down the road. It needs to happen now. We can all make a difference by working together. And again, it has to be top down and bottom up. It can't just be one or the other. All these things are needed.
Well, I'm glad we're ending on a hopeful note. And I will say my hope, the reason why I have hope, is that I can see the children are a lot more engaged in this. They are not happy with the way that their parents have treated the earth. They are not happy necessarily with plastics, and they do care about the animals and the ecosystems. So this next generation does really care. It's amazing, but it takes a generation or 2 to turn the tide. I am learning. Things don't happen like that, unfortunately. But what does give me hope is that the children will come to our rescue. I just hope that we can help them along faster and don't have to wait for them to be our age for it to happen. So, Michael Gerard, thank you so much for joining me on this. This was great. Dr. Ellen Prager, thank you very much. And to all of you who are watching at home right now, wherever you may be, I appreciate it. We're going to be doing more of these climate and weather-related segments here on WFLA Now, and I really do appreciate you tuning in. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.